Well, happy Groundhog Day, everybody. It's Friday. Greetings from the swamp. I'm phoning in because I am without my computer. I told a white lie yesterday. I told Mike I forgot it when I left the office. The fact of the matter is I couldn't find it when I left the office, and I had a train to catch. I'm here today wrapping up another January 6th case where a Baltimore resident faces as much as 4.5 years for his conduct on January 6th. We, of course, are asking for far less and wish us well. Quick update on the Owen Shroyer case. We got bad news from the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, but it's worse news for the court and its integrity. Owen, as you know, pled guilty. Owen Shroyer is one of the personalities on Alex Jones's network InfoWars. Owen hosts an afternoon show called The War Room, and he's been at it now for a number of years. He was present with Alex on Capitol grounds on January 6th, and he was charged. He entered a guilty plea, effectively to criminal trespass, and, off we went to sentencing. We were surprised by the government's sentencing memos in Owen's case. They called for him to be incarcerated because he'd spread disinformation, because he continued even after January 6th to support the notion that the election had been stolen, and otherwise engaged in what the government referred to as largely incendiary comments. He chanted 1776. He chanted death to tyrants on his march to the Capitol. Our position at sentencing was, so what? That's not trespass. That's protected speech. People in the United States have the right to petition for the redress of grievances, real or imagined. Take whatever position you want on whether the election was stolen. Even if you're wrong, you can go and protest. You can speak out. You can chant 1776 until you get asthma. You can chant death to tyrants. Used to be something we believed in this country until we decided to bend the knee to virtual tyrants or virtuoso tyrants. And so we argued that the court could not consider protected speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to petition for redress of grievances, freedom of speech in imposing sentence. And Judge Timothy J. Kelly in the United States District Court for the District of Connecticut, Columbia rather, did just that. He referred twice to Owen's protected conduct and comments in imposing a sentence of incarceration. But here's where it gets technical and interesting. Under the plea agreement, Owen agreed that he would waive an appeal if he was sentenced to a period of imprisonment less than a certain number. And I think that number was 6 months, although I can't remember. He was sentenced in effect to 2 months imprisonment by Judge Kelly. So we said to the judge, you can't sentence him in reliance on protected speech or protected activity. The judge said, I'm not doing that. We think the record shows that he did. So we took an appeal to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. And we said, look, there was a structural problem in this plea and in the sentence that was imposed. Even though Owen pled guilty to trespass, even though he was sentenced to a number below the maximum, which would have triggered a waiver of his appellate rights, the court's reasoning nonetheless was substantively infirm. That is, the court punished Owen for reasons no court can and or should punish an individual. It punished him for his protected speech. So we took the appeal to the D.C. Circuit, and the United States government promptly filed a motion to dismiss, saying there is nothing to appeal. Mr. Shroyer waived his right to appeal in the plea agreement when he said that any sentence below a certain threshold was appropriate. We responded by saying that is what the plea agreement said, but it was never contemplated that the district court would break the law and punish Mr. Shroyer for the exercise of his speech. We called that, within sentencing law, substantively unreasonable. So we responded to the government's motion to dismiss by not just replying to that memoranda they wrote, but by submitting our full merits brief so the district court could see what we're talking about. Our brief was filed months ago now, and the government sought a long extension of time to reply to our brief. I think they sought until March. Yesterday, in mid-afternoon, in a short 1 or 2 paragraph ruling, the court basically said he pled guilty and he got sentenced to within the plea range that triggered the waiver. Therefore, he can't appeal. A three-judge panel of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia looked away from the First Amendment argument and refused even to consider it. They weren't troubled by the fact that a judge sentenced a man for protected speech. They weren't troubled by the fact that the court sentenced a man in part in reliance on things that the Constitution protects. They weren't troubled by the fact that the judge, in effect, broke the fundamental law of the land. So, there are people in the press, if you're an Owen hater, Owen should never have taken the appeal. He pled guilty. He got a slap on the wrist. What's the big deal? The big deal is we've got a government here in Washington, D.C., where I sit this morning, that is prosecuting people for protected speech and asking judges of the district court to impose sentences in part because of things that people said that were perfectly lawful for them to say. Now, in Owen's case, it's not quite, sentencing the village crank, the guy on the town green, claiming that the end is coming to a term of imprisonment. Owen did plead guilty to trespass because he did trespass. But as he trespassed, he also engaged in protected speech. Before he trespassed, he engaged in protected speech. After he trespassed, he engaged in protected speech. And for a judge to consider speech that Owen made, disinformation, supporting the Stop the Steal rhetoric, to consider that as an element of trespass is simply wrong as a matter of law and as a matter of fact. So we intend to bring a petition to the United States Supreme Court asking them to review this, because what is at stake is the chilling effect of this prosecution on speech for everyone. Will you now be afraid to speak up at a protest that you go to for fear that someone may riot, and that if you are charged as a participant in the riot, the things you said a week before, 2 weeks before, will be used as proof of your criminal intent, or what's worse, will be used as proof as a factor to enhance the sentence that it should be imposed on you if you broke a window. That's the practical consequence of the Owen Shroyer prosecution, and it is a deeply significant prosecution and a deeply significant case. Shame on the District Court of Appeals for ignoring the issue that brought us to court in the first instance. Jackson, we get the government we deserve, and we deserve better than this.
Jackson Baird on Rumble says we are all Owen Shroyer. So I think that puts a nice punctuation on what you were just saying there, Norm. Peter Hans on X asks, could court consider religion in sentencing?
I don't know what that question means, but probably not. So I'm going to assume it means that, if you are a Mormon charged with polygamy or something, I don't know, or a pacifist, or consider the Berrigan brothers when in their anti-war protests in the 60s and 70s, these were inspired by deeply religious convictions. I think the law is that you are punished for your offenses, not for your beliefs. However, where the line gets murky is where your beliefs inform your offenses. And so in the Berrigan brothers' case, they were pacifists inspired by a deep commitment to Catholicism. Were they punished because they were Catholics or because they were pacifists who broke the law? The traditional answer is they were pacifists who broke the law. But why were they pacifists who broke the law? They were pacifists who broke the law because that was their religious conviction. So it becomes a sort of slippery slope. And I think that fighting back hard from within the well of the court every time an issue like this emerges is important to send a message to the government. Don't go there. And in the Shroyer case, they went there. They danced all over. They tap danced on the First Amendment. They urinated on the right to freedom of to petition for redress of grievance and freedom of assembly. And the appellate court handed them tissue paper to clean up the dribble afterwards. Shame on the D.C. Circuit. Let's hope the United States Supreme Court gets it right.
I understand that you will be on the War Room with Owen Shroyer later today. And in fact, I've got an X post on the screen here where Owen says, my lawyer and I will be addressing this on air tomorrow. Stay tuned for updates. And that addressing this on air tomorrow is an obvious reference to the order that you've been analyzing here for us for the past 10 minutes or so. So what time can people tune in to hear you discuss it in further detail?
I think it's 6 Eastern time, 5 Central time. I know we were trying to do it earlier, but I'm on a train today, returning to New England from DC, and often internet and certain Wi-Fi spottage is, coverage is spotty on the train. So I think 6 p.m. Eastern time. Check out the InfoWars. Check out the War Room. yours truly will be talking about this case in a little more detail.
Excellent. And of course, Law Pod Daily will get a shout out while you're doing that. Let's pivot to the Obesity Bill of Rights. You brought this to my attention, Norm, and I can't help it. This is just sort of I find comedy in this, and maybe that says more about me than it says about the existence of the entity at all. But the Obesity Bill of Rights. So it says it envisions a future where more than 100 million adults in the U.S. will lead healthier lives because they have these rights to receive patient-centered quality obesity care. And what rights, one might ask, does this Obesity Bill of Rights make reference? So on the screen here, Norm, I've got 5. The first is the right to accurate, clear, trusted, and accessible information on obesity as a
keep your
treatable
face
chronic
out of the
disease.
refrigerator at night, you know?
Number 2, the right to respect by all the members.
Don't push little kids out of the way at the fast food line at McDonald's.
Number 3, the right to make treatment decisions about one's health goals and obesity care in consultation with the individual's health providers. Number 4, the right.
Yeah, you can eat yourself to death, but don't tell me it's my problem when you get diabetes, high blood pressure, and you can't walk up the stairs without huffing and puffing.
The number 4, the right to treatment from qualified health providers. Which
I can see a new medical specialty now.
Right?
Yeah,
the number 5 is the right to person-centered care that is personalized, respects the individual's cultural beliefs, meets their specific health goals, and considers the person's whole health and not just their weight status. I'm sorry.
I understand the United States has an obesity problem, and I'm carrying more weight than I want to carry right now. But I've noticed something about my weight, and it is directly proportional to the amount of exercise I get and to the care that I take in eating. So, when I turned 60 a while ago, I decided I'd run another marathon, one more before I died. And I couldn't put in the 60 to 80 miles a week of road work, so I settled on a half. And I did well, I ran a 144 half marathon, which for a guy, at 60 years old or 62, or whatever the age was at that point, it wasn't bad. I was proud of that. But I was even happier with what I saw when I looked in the mirror. I dropped like 60 or 70 pounds. I had to get some new suits. And I was eating like a horse because my objective was to keep weight on. I was running a lot and just couldn't keep it on. So then, I overtrained, got tired. But as always, every distance runner knows the simple truth. When you're running 10 miles a day or 5 to 10 miles a day, you can eat all the pasta you want. But when you stop running that weight or that distance, rather, the weight comes on. So mine's crept back on. But whose fault is that? When I look in the mirror, do I say, oh my gosh, look what somebody did to me? Or do I say, oh my gosh, my actions have consequences? And maybe I need to be a little more active, and maybe I need to avoid seconds at dinner, and maybe I should trim back on those luscious lunches. Do I need a Bill of Rights? Does everybody get a medal now? Are we all so precious that when that heffalump goes huffing and puffing into his or her doctor's office, we're supposed to stop, part the waters, and say, can we get you a cheeseburger? I mean, give me a break. I don't see in other countries having the same obesity problem that the United States does. So don't tell me that this is an intrinsic medical condition and that we're discriminating against people who can't help themselves. We're a nation of fatzos. And we're a nation of fatzos because because of our behavior.
Well, look, Norm,
because of how we act and behave.
We're a nation of innovators. And I mean, I hear your point on the rest of the world not having the same problems with obesity writ large as compared to the U.S. But look, the rest of the world didn't innovate hot Cheetos in McDonald's. You know what I'm saying? Our problem is that we cared so much about making food just taste so damn good for so long, and then making it super cheap and accessible and and scalable, that we're now, all of that's coming home to roost. We've got several people in the chat discussing this over on Rumble. Thinking Man says, as healthy food becomes out of affordability range for more people, expect a big rise in obesity. I actually think that we're going in the opposite direction right now. I'm seeing a large movement online and otherwise. I think, Gen Z, who we'll talk about in a second, is drinking less alcohol than any prior generation. It's actually partially the reason that you're seeing big beverage alcohol manufacturers pivot into what's regarded as the non-alc or the zero alc space. You'll start seeing, zero alcohol beer, but then, other near beer alternatives. And obviously those are high in sugar. Alcohol is always high in sugar, empty calories, that sort of thing. So there is a certain consciousness around weight, but I'm not sure I totally believe that it's born of some sort of innate sense of health and well-being as much as it is some vanity reflective of our larger social media culture and sort of the TikTok, Instagram generation. So who knows? And whether, whether we need to care that much. I mean, we've got the Ozempic craze where, perfectly capable people with money to spend on, trainers and a healthier lifestyle and, the discipline required, even if that's artificial discipline in the form of a coach or some other sort of mentorship group, et cetera, are opting for the quick fix in the form of Ozempic or pharmaceutical to do the work for them. So, I don't, I think that overall we should get to a return to the Arnold Schwarzenegger effect in America. I think, we should sacrifice some level of our I guess vanity for getting in the gym and pumping iron. You know what I mean? Let's
Well,
make
yeah,
it
but
okay to
the
be
notion of
masculine.
yeah, I hear that. And the notion of food deserts, though, I think is a significant one. In many urban areas, it's hard to find a place that's selling fresh fruit and vegetables, so people are relying on empty calories when better calories might too. I mean, I get that point, but I want to resist the narrative in the United States that compresses every undesirable outcome into a socioeconomic phenomena that
Yeah,
can
no,
be
I agree.
cured with a social
100%.
program.
I 1,000% agree with you, Norm. And what we have also, those Janet Smith, we got a ton of good stuff in the chat. We should talk about weight more often, Norm. Janet Smith says bodies weren't made.
I'm talking about weight.
Been pushing P here. Bodies
Yeah.
weren't meant to digest seed oils and tons of sugar. The 70s slander of animal fats made us fat. Again, I agree. And I think that, we talked about Cernovich before. Cernovich is big into sort of the healthy lifestyle stuff as well. I personally have, listened to a number of different podcasters and influencers over the years and come to something that is beginning to work for me. But I do think that the likes of, fat sources and butter were demonized artificially to the credit of sugar, right? And sugar has been that silent killer. I mean, we do have a diabetic crisis in America right now. Older people, of course, develop diabetes, but I think there's never been more younger people with a diabetic either predisposition, precursor, or active diabetes that are treated.
I'd be interested in transnational statistics. I mean, is the rate of or incidence of diabetes in the United States higher than other countries? And I suspect it is. And so I don't think it's I don't think it's just diet. I think it's culture. I think it's I think it's a certain spirit of self-indulgence.
And I'm sure that culture will, the American culture and the rate of diabetes within certain in groups as well would be interesting to compare. Let's see. Mari is talking about high glycemic foods. Dawn McNeil, good morning, Dawn. Dawn says avoid processed foods, cook and move, play PB. I don't know what. Oh,
pickleball. Oh yeah, Madam Pickleball speaks. Dawn McNeil. Dawn is a pickleball aficionado who will, after this podcast is over, lace up her sneakers, go to a pickleball court, and then bang away. Someday, Dawn, I want you to teach me pickleball.
That's right. T Girl says the Japanese government is looking for programs to incentivize drinking among 18 to 39. Loss of tax revenues as that age group moves away from alcohol. That is fascinating to me, T Girl. Thank you for that.
That's amazing. Yeah.
I mean, they're looking to incentivize drinking alcohol. That's wild.
A new cocktail, the Harry Carry, because your pet shouldn't be forgotten.
Lawyer Will.
Or how about some Pearl Harbor tears? Tora, have a shot. Why not?
Lawyer Will says weight is such a heavy topic, though. So maybe we should.
Yeah. Lawyer Will, I'm in your hometown, and there's a reason I didn't call you to get together last night. That might have been it.
Well, let's see here. We're going to move to the Rolling Stone. I know we've only got about 10 minutes here. You've got a hard out at 8:30. You sent me an article from Rolling Stone that I think has a different title than what it came through on the small link, but the gerontocracy waged war on Gen Z. Now they're fighting back. And this, I believe, was originally published, Norm, in mid-December of 23, but it still
It
is
just
relevant
made
as
my
ever.
news feed. It just made my news feed today, apropos our earlier discussion of generational differences. But the reason I passed it on to you, there was a really striking line in there. You know, if I were to ask you popular culture figures that really influenced you as a teenager, who would you name?
Oh my goodness, probably Lil Wayne.
All right, and you know, I would go back to sports figures and like
Yeah,
Jimi
Kobe
Hendrix
Bryant,
and
Michael
Bob Dylan.
Jordan,
Yeah,
yeah. Those
so
guys.
in the Rolling Stone piece, it talks about the cultural icons for the rising generation being Greta Thunberg and Donald
I
Trump.
saw that.
And I thought that might explain everything. Can you imagine a universe in which, if you were looking for an energetic role model, you had to pick some autistic chick angry at the world, or a guy like Donald Trump? I don't understand that. I don't know, and it just could be a rhetorical flourish from the author. But you know, I take seriously the challenge that you posed to me and our listeners, Mike, to try to conceptualize what is going on in the psychological universe
I've
of
got a
Gen Z.
development along those lines, Norm. So I was reading this article this morning and I'm thinking back. So the original, not the original article, but one of the articles recently that we talked about was the anti-boomers, right? And that was from
Mhm.
Isaac Simpson over at the American Mind. And I think I actually sent that to Mark Randazza on X yesterday. So if you guys are tracking some of our interactions on LawPod Daily or my personal account, you will see that Mark had a post on X where he was talking about a revelation he had regarding, I guess, targeted advertising and the role of social media in social conditioning. And Norm, I'll send this to you and you can kind of look at it. But not, I don't want to get too far off topic here. But in essence, Mark was talking about that this hit him in the head and finally woke him up that he's interested in scuba diving, for example. And if he talks about scuba diving or Googles something about scuba diving or going to Bonaire and looking at different facilities and stuff like that, that all of a sudden his timeline and the algorithm will start to push that sort of content into his reality, right? Into his scrolling timeline and on whatever social media platform. And the comparison that was made to him by another attorney was, imagine you are 14 years old and you begin to Google search thoughts of suicide, and
Yeah.
rather than being conditioned in a similar positive way as scuba diving and beautiful scenery, underwater coral reefs and that sort of thing, that one is inundated with thoughts of suicide and continuing threads about depression and the demographic changes and all of these certain things that happen with Gen Z, that are happening right now with Gen Z. And is that a way for us to begin to understand what is actually happening with the younger generations with respect to social media and this sort of synthetic environment that is social media and what's happening within that atmosphere?
Well, that's a great point.
And the anti-boomer, that article, Norm, getting to my point, which is going to sound a little trite now that I've gone on that deeper thread with Mark, but the anti-boomer talked about the linguistic challenges of Gen Z versus what we're going to call the gerontocracy, and that there is a language barrier, that the communication as to these issues doesn't have very much crossover because of where it takes place and how it takes place, right? Gen Z communicates internally and with one another in a manner distinct and unique from that of really millennials, Gen Xers, and boomers. But mostly that is felt between the boomers and Gen Z. And in reading this article this morning, I had this thought, Norman, is it perhaps that Gen Z is largely illiterate? So even if they, it's like I ascribe this a notion in the anti-boomer context that perhaps Gen Z doesn't want to talk to the boomer demo about their problems or what they're saying and what they're facing. And this article in Rolling Stone and that reference to Greta Thunberg and that sort of stuff, like sort of and the profile and in the younger people that are listening to, what is it, Jean Pierre from the White House, and Nancy Pelosi touching down and giving a speech and that kind of stuff. Are these people just not able to communicate with anyone other than themselves in that sort of mimetic way. And I know it sounds trite and very condescending, but I asked that question in earnest. Has our education system failed so surreally that we can't understand one another, right? That we are actually
And
speaking different languages at this point.
it may be. I mean, I don't know if there was a fascinating hearing this week in Washington in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Mark Zuckerberg was back, and among the things that the Judiciary Committee was questioning the social media folks about was the harm. One of your issues, Mike, the harm to kids from online exposure. And so, apropos what you said, two things come to mind. First, the thing that Randazza talked about, and that is social media pitching what you look at. I'm an Islamophobe, and so now I have to look out on my TikTok. Excuse me, I'll be a minute. They're trying to get me out of my hotel room. Now I have to worry about getting too much feed of violent Islamic folks. And I've noticed some days on Twitter, the things that I did that piss me off are the things that I see more of. So I make a self-conscious effort to avoid them. But here's the other issue. And, think about, I'm not going to ask you a personal question, Mike, but those of us of a certain age grew up in an era where you could get Playboy or Penthouse if you were a certain age at the pharmacy. And, it was a challenge to get one out of there if you were a kid.
Porn
because
is
you wanted
ruinous.
to see,
Porn is ruinous.
you wanted to see those naked women. Now imagine if you've got your access to a computer where your libido is going to take you.
I don't have to imagine it. Yeah, no. I don't have to imagine it.
But listen to this statistic. Listen to this statistic. This was reported yesterday in the Wall Street Journal. Meta, what was once Facebook, last year reported 27.2 million instances of suspected child sex abuse material to the National Centers for Missing and Exploited Children. That was in 2022. That's an amazing number of images. And so I think what we have, and I think this goes to your point about the need to protect young people, is we have youngsters, young folks with all the curiosity, drive, and energy that youth provides, encountering an external world through an unfiltered portal. And they don't have the judgment to distinguish better from worse. And those who own the portals have an incentive to feed to feed them what they want in order to get more clicks and more revenue. And they don't know what's good for them, and therefore what they want is destroying them and perhaps destroying the rest of us. So subtly, Mike, little by little, take a look at yesterday's Wall Street Journal if you can find it. The lead story over the fold: blood on your hands. CEOs hit over harm to kids online. And it was a powerful presentation by the Senate Judiciary Committee as they grilled Zuckerberg. Obviously, the libertarian response is, well, we don't want to censor content. But I think what we have to do is educate and protect youth. And if in our race to the bottom in our culture, if we decide we can't impose standards because everybody gets a prize, we shouldn't be surprised if we end up with a world where no one can talk to one another, because what we've got are millions of little appetite-driven machines being fed their worst fantasies and encouraged to make them a way of life.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
A steady libidinal diet, in other words, right? And
Yeah.
On a generation of people who have not quite come to understand exactly how that stuff functions and historically what it has meant within a longer timeline. I think that hits it on the head. There are a number of different factors. But in all within that umbrella of the atmosphere of this digital flattening that we've encountered. But I mean, the access to pornography is something that I think is wholly underrated in especially your demo, Norm, because really the proliferation of that stuff occurred right on the heels of my sort of I would say high school experience. I mean, just the access and ubiquitous nature of just easily accessible, free, and then these companies make so much money. I think people would be mind blown to know what a company like Pornhub actually rakes in on an annual basis. And it's a lot of money, a lot of money. And recently we've had states like Virginia and North Carolina sign legislation to disallow porn websites in the states without the consent of those who are 18 or older, right? So they have these sort of proxy walls or these requirements that someone register as a user in some sort of effort, I think, to curb that appetite. But
yeah, but then kids are just going to lie.
I was going to say the internet
you're
is far
14 and
too
horny.
porous.
Suddenly you became an 18-year-old. You became an 18-year-old genius. I mean, I get that.
Right. Well, I mean,
It's
and
a
the internet
problem.
is also far too porous for that to be sort of a blanket, a blanket measure with any sort of efficacy that we could be proud of. Right.
Well, listen, I got to get off to court and protect the innocents against the predations of the United States government. So thanks, folks, for listening today. Mike, we got to get together on a long form. I know we're talking about a couple people. Let's get it done so that we can provide folks with content that'll change their life and protect them from Gen Z and ubiquitous social media predators.
All right, Norm. Well, enjoy your train ride. Go find your computer. We will be back Monday at 8 a.m. Eastern time on YouTube, on X, on Rumble, etc. You can also find our podcast uploaded daily in audio-only format to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, wherever you find podcasts. Norm, have a great weekend. We will see you on Monday.
Ciao. Be well, everyone. Bye.
See you later, Norm. Thank you, everybody. See you on Monday.